they got up and one of them, who was like their spokesman type of person, so he said, okay, we've got some demands. So I said, look here, what is our relationship? I said, you're a mujahid, a fellow who fights a jihad. By that definition, I am the zalim, I am the oppressor. We have a conversation, we can't. So what are you asking? What are you wanting to have a conversation with me for? So he was even more confused. So then I turned around and I said, look here, as a citizen of my country, if you ask me for anything, I am obligated to give it to you. So even if you consider yourself to be a mujahideen, you ask him. The mainstay of movement against terrorism in J&K today is the Jammu and Kashmir police, which is almost 70% Muslim.
This is what people need to know.
This is what they need to know.
Appreciate you saying that on my podcast. And this is the reason we started this podcast. I don't feel like modern day television can get nuggets of truth out like this. If you've enjoyed any of the military episodes, any of the episodes with the police force that we've done on TRS, I promise you're going to enjoy this one. Keep in mind, this is one of the most experienced and honestly one of the most legendary IPS officers of our country. This is also a very difficult episode to listen to. It gets very brutal in some parts. So I wish to say enjoy the episode, but honestly just sit back and take in this man's life experiences. It's about Kashmir. It's about modern day India. And it's about the last 30 years of a slightly more brutal version of India that the generations before us saw. This is SM Sahai, sir, on TRS. SM Sahai, sir. Welcome to TRS. When you walked in with a little bit of an intense vibe. Usually people come here and the guards fall off, they become relaxed, they become calm. There's a lot of intensity with you. Now I feel your guard has kind of dropped off a little bit. Maybe it hasn't.
Well, I mean, as I said, it seemed to be like that. It's not that I am like that.
You know, people call you a super cop.
Well, they call every other cop super cop, so there's nothing great about that.
Really? Okay.
That's become like a general thing. Any cop that has a bit of a social media profile immediately becomes a super cop.
Really? Okay, but in the world of cops, who's the actual super cop?
Well, if you ask me, the word actually originated with Robero and got magnified with KPS Gill.
Okay, you'll have to give little context. A lot of people don't know these names.
But Robero was basically a Mumbai cop who was taken to Punjab at the peak of the Khalistan problem. And he was able to set the agenda for the Punjab police. This is something that happens very often in insurgency hit areas. A word which is now like more or less used as terrorism, but I would say insurgency, it has got its own connotations. So when Mr. Robero came, he set the agenda. And that laid the groundwork. When Mr. KPS Gill came, he was the very flamboyant Jat Sikh IPS officers imported from Assam, and he had this very towering personality, and he also had his own style. So he gave that entire thing a new kind of dimension. And being a local Jat Sikh, it was very good for the narrative because the Khalistan problem is largely a Jat Sikh problem. And he being a Jat Sikh cop kind of, provided the contrast. And he was very successful. So that is why, that's where the word of super cops in the Indian context came out.
Okay.
And then as I said, any moderately successful cop after that is like called a super cop.
Okay. Very rookie question for you. But you said that he set the agenda with the cops. You use this sentence.
Yes.
Break that down. What does that mean, setting an agenda with the cop?
See, what happens in insurgency situation is that usually the local police is a part of society. The recruitment is from the society.
Okay.
So anything that is happening within the society, you can't expect a member of the police force not to be influenced by that. So for example, in Punjab, when the Khalistan movement started off, then the influences of that Khalistani sentiment, particularly after the Operation Blue Star in 84, became very strong. So even a moderate average Sikh who was not really concerned about the Punjab problem but had a little angst about what happened in the Golden Temple. So, these influences do come into the police force. So you can have people whose loyalties may become questionable. People who don't want to be disloyal definitely don't want to side with the state. So getting a police force to function in that environment is quite a challenge. And that is when the agenda has to be set. And that is where I think Robero was very successful. But where he was able to actually identify the fact that the Khalistanis were not really looking for separatism, but it was more of a socio-economic issue being exploited by a certain element of people looking at a very personal agenda. So when you have grievances in a society, which all of them have, and then some self-seeking leadership can exploit it.
Okay.
And when they exploit that sentiment, and it happens all the time, it's happening even today. So when they exploit that, then they take the society into a very different direction, and that direction influences everybody: the administration, the police, everybody. So then you require a leadership in those organizations. The police leadership is required at that time to then pull the police force out of that sense of inertia, or I would say despondency, and start fighting the problem.
Okay. So basically setting an agenda for other police officers is kind of partially strategy, partially how we have company culture in startups. It's something like that where you set rules and a game plan.
See, the first thing that you have to do in a thing like this is to actually appeal to the mind.
To?
Appeal to the mind.
Okay.
So you have to explain to the force that what they're doing is the right thing.
Okay.
Because there are going to be enough influences in the society which will tell them otherwise. Like if you recall, were you born at that time? No. In 84, sorry.
I'm 93.
I know. When 84 happened, a lot of the Sikh regiments revolted. And they mutinied and they came in columns towards Punjab. So it's not that the Sikhs were disloyal soldiers, or they are disloyal soldiers today. They are some of the bravest we've had. But that was a situation. A sentiment overrode the entire force. So it is very important that the loyalties of your force are not taken for granted. You must explain to them why they are fighting a cause, especially when you're asking them to put their lives on the line. See, fighting a routine crime problem or a routine law and order problem is very different. But when somebody is expected to put his life on the line, then it has to be a very different motivation level. So that's why this is very important.
Okay. Have you truly enjoyed your journey being a super cop?
Well, you can take the super part out of it. Yes, I've enjoyed my journey as a cop.
Cop?
Yeah.
What did you enjoy?
The whole challenge of it. In fact, I think the Kashmir's most challenging period was seen by people of my generation and my vintage of officers. So it was quite very, very challenging.
What's the
Especially
rush?
because you were thrown out into the deep end.
Okay. I want to totally deep dive into this whole Kashmir angle. But first, from a little human side, what's the actual rush for the heart as an outcome of your job? For example, as a YouTuber, in 2 hours of my work, I get to influence lakhs of people. That's the rush. And we've built it up over time. But that's the actual human joy that when I go to sleep at night, I think, okay, that's what I'm adding to the world. So I want to know. I mean, it's very obvious what a cop adds to the world, but I want to know from your mouth.
Well, I mean, when we landed in J&K, it was quite a peaceful place. It was all about tourism and there was barely any crime. I think the average murder rate of the entire state was 10 murders a year. And most of them would not even qualify as murders because they were actually killings that took place in the heat of the moment. So, which is actually culpable homicide. And from that, suddenly this whole situation erupted where you had explosions taking place, processions coming out, militants with AK-47s, part of those processions, shooting of policemen, civilians, burning of houses. There was like total rampage. And
what was the point in the timeline where you visited for the first time?
I joined the state in 88.
Okay.
And this all started at the end of 89.
Okay. Destiny.
Yeah, basically. So when we were in the academy, my batchmates would all tell me, we're going to come to you for our honeymoon. And later on, when I went back for this second, we have 2 phases of training. So when we went back for the second phase, this whole problem had already erupted. So then they said that, I think we'll give it a second thought about it.
No, come for your honeymoon. आ जाओ.
तो वो सब जो उनका था वो सब गायब हो गया. Anyway. So that was how it was. And then it became quite challenging, and it was exciting in its own way.
Okay.
Especially because, what happens in situations like this is that nobody has a clue of what to do. And obviously, because if you had a clue what to do, then the situation don't arise.
It just randomly started? There was no like boiling tension?
Well, I think the indications were all there. It's that there was political disbelief.
Break that down.
And administrative inertia. Okay, political disbelief was that what happens is that when political parties are elected to power, it happens in a certain time frame, right? So, a few years down the line, the mandate that was given to you and the popularity that you had may have actually disappeared.
Okay,
but you have a tenure, so you continue to believe that you have this mandate till the end of that tenure. When you may have dissipated it or lost that mandate in between. So, like what happened in Kashmir was in 87 elections, which were largely believed to have been rigged. A government came into power. And in this case, the two parties that came into power were actually the premier opposing parties. And politically, let me put it this way, what happens is that when the opposition and the ruling parties or the two parties combine, they create a vacuum. Because for the balance of power and for society and for thought or whatever, democracy, let's put it this way, there is a requirement of there being an opposing side. So when it disappears, the people who don't like the what is being done by the combination of these two parties have no choice. And that is when this, disruptive element starts. Sometimes it can be agitational, like we saw during the time of the JP movement, when the opposition kind of was put behind bars. Or you have it in terms of where, like you had it in Germany, when the two major parties combined, and then you had the Bader-Meinhof group coming up. One of the earliest terrorist movements that took place. So similarly, when there is a concentration of power in one entity, so that's why even freedom struggles will have a lot of terrorist activity happening around it. Because what do you do if you want to challenge that power? So in a democratic setup, at least there is the other to go to. In this case, there is none. So in Kashmir, also in 87, when the election took place, and the two main opposing parties combined, there was a opposition that was created, that was the Muslim United Front. That Muslim United Front's candidates apparently in 87's election were not allowed to win. And as a consequence of that, there was a lot of disgruntlement. So though there was a political party in power, there was an elected government, that the actual acceptance and the mandate of that government was very questionable. And it has been seen time and again that when there is a gap or in governance, because there is lack of acceptability of the government in power, then these kind of things begin to rise. That is the reason why it happened.
Okay. Very young person perspective here. A lot of people my age and younger only understand the Kashmir problem a little bit from news, and nowadays from Twitter and this whole Kashmir Files movie that released and all the hype that was around it. I'm sorry I'm taking it to the world of movies now, but again, this is how I have to commercially connect with the audience. Have you watched the film?
Yes.
Did you think it was an accurate depiction of what happened?
Not really.
It wasn't. Okay. We're going to break down that thought entirely. I want to understand what the truth is, and only men like yourself who've actually been there have a right to speak about the truth. I want to again begin in a slightly morbid place, so I apologize. But what was the most psychologically difficult thing you saw? And I ask you that for you to set a bar in terms of intensity and then explain the context, if you're comfortable to do so.
Okay. One of the most, I think this is in context with the question you asked with regard to Kashmir Files, why it's not an accurate depiction. What happened with the Kashmiri Pandits is a very sordid story, and there's no denying that. But why I said it's not an accurate description is because the vilification of the Kashmiri Muslim is not justified.
Okay.
And I'll give this to you because it connects with exactly one of the most horrifying incidents that I have seen. I was what they call the subdivisional police officer in Srinagar town. And the heart of that jurisdiction is Koti Bagh. And I was sitting in front of the women's college in this huge explosion took place. And from the distance of the sound, I could make out it had happened in my jurisdiction. And I drove to the place, and what I saw was a completely abandoned street, which is called Nai Sadak, which must have been Nai at one point, but this was part of the old town now. And there was a piece of pulsating meat, I would say, in the middle of the road. There were small shreds of flesh and blood splattered across the street and on the shutters of the shops alongside. I saw one thigh of a human being lying in one gutter and one arm lying in another gutter. And I remember there was a crow that picked up a hand, and it was too heavy for it to carry, so it dropped it near me. And this thing was still pulsating, and I immediately understood who the person was. This was an inspector of BSF by the name of Akbar, who was a Kashmiri Muslim. He had been caught by what was called the Al-Umar Mujahideen, and they had tied a bomb around him and blown him up in the middle of the street. So when I picked up his dead body, I remember my PSOs came with me, and we could barely walk there because the boots were sticking to the ground.
By dead body, you mean just
whatever that was left of the upper torso. The rest of it had been blown up. So we picked up that arm, that leg, and that hand, and the sweater was over his face. When I pulled the sweater, then I saw his face. And such was the whole scene that my PSOs were completely transfixed. They didn't know what to do. So then I said, get some cloth, sheet, sack, whatever you can, to where we can put this remnants of this body in. And there was nothing to lift it with. So I actually picked up the dead body from its hair and put it into the sack and put the leg and the arm and everything, because we wanted to get it off the streets. It is a very, very disturbing scene. And then the father of the inspector came. And I looked at him and I saw he was completely stoic, no emotions on his face. He just looked at the sack and he said, "Is this him?" I said, "Yes, that's what is left over." He said, "ठीक है, आप गाड़ी में रख दीजिए." So I put it in the vehicle, he took it. We got the fire brigade and washed the street and all that to just kind of normalize the whole thing. Why I made this incident was that it is not that the Kashmiri Muslim did not sacrifice for the Indian cause in Kashmir. That's the point of it.
Okay, like you can't just categorize every single Kashmiri Muslim as someone who was against.
See, the mainstay of the movement against terrorism in J&K today is the Jammu and Kashmir police, which is almost 70% Muslim.
Okay. This is what people need to know.
This is what they need to know.
Okay. Appreciate you saying that on my podcast. And this is the reason we started this podcast. I don't feel like modern day television can get the truth out, can get nuggets of truth out like this. Did you have a conversation with his father after?
No, I didn't have a conversation with his father after that.
What was in your mind?
What was in my mind was the acceptance of that old man when he saw his son. He must have been as old as I am today, with a son who's of a similar age. I was trying to think what was going through the heart and mind of this man who's picking up his child in this form. And I was also thinking about, look at the choice that this man must have had to make. Because at that time, Kashmir was in a state of virtual revolt. There was a vast minority which had picked up arms against the state. But the vast majority was actually not really involved. But you see, there is always what they call the tyranny of the minority. That a very large vocal minority can actually suppress a very moderate, reasonable majority. That's why, they say that tyranny actually survives on the silence of the majority. So it's a very typical case in cases of terrorism also.
Are you comfortable breaking down the demographics of the vast majority and the small minority at that time to draw out a better picture?
Okay, like there is... let me break down the demography of the state. Can you visualize the map of Jammu and Kashmir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When you see the map of Jammu and Kashmir, you see a squarish territory with like 2 years sticking out.
Yes.
Now those 2 years are not with us.
Hmm.
One is the part which is Aksai Chin, which is China, and the other part is that Gilgit-Baltistan area, which is with Pakistan. So we basically have like a triangular piece in between in that square with 2 years.
And when we say border with Pakistan, it's actually the edges of that
There are
triangle.
two issues. The border of Pakistan is up to Akhnur in Jammu region. Thereafter is what is we call the line of actual or the line of control. Line of actual control is actually used in terms of China. This is the line of control. So this will, I mean, we can relate it to the history of the entire Kashmir movement also. So when you approach J&K state from Punjab side, it has got the Dogras. The Dogras are essentially people who lived in parts of northern Punjab, Himachal Pradesh, and in Jammu division. They're basically that population, Basauli, Chamba, that population. Dogri is very akin to Punjabi. When you move towards the west from Jammu side, you go to Rajouri Poonch, which is again Punjabi speaking, but they speak Pahadi version of Punjabi. You go a little north when you reach the Pir Panjal, then you have got on the east side the area of Doda, Kishtwar. There are a mixture of Kashmiris and the Chamba people.
What is Chamba people?
Himachalis.
Okay.
So their feature-wise are also a mixture and language-wise also a mixture. Bhadarwai, Kishtwadi are very similar. There's a mixture of both the languages. And then you go up to north into Kashmir Valley. Now, Kashmir Valley is about 100 kilometers long and 20 kilometers wide, where pure Sunni Kashmiri Muslims live with some Shias also. They are all surrounded by mountains where again Pahadi Muslims live. So this is the linguistic and racial breakup of the state. The main movement actually was from the Kashmiri Muslims of the Sunni ilk, which is in that belt. The Pahadis were not with them, but later on they also got involved. So this is the thing. If you actually calculate just that population, it's in the minority. The one that resides in that 100 by 20 kilometer stretch, that is in the minority.
Which sparked it off.
Which is started because they are the basically mind of the state.
Okay. Now, while we are breaking down this truth of Kashmir Files section, in no way are we defending the atrocities committed. Like, I want to make that clear. This is just a podcaster's
no, see,
rule of
as
the
I
book.
said that, what happened with the Kashmiri Pandits is a very horrific incident. And there's no doubt that the people who perpetrated it had it in mind to do ethnic cleansing. Unfortunately, even the people who were pretending to be secular, it is the JKLF people, they also indulged in it, and it was on a religious line, no doubt about it. But the fact is that then if you look at the figures of people who died in the valley, the number of Pandits killed is very small compared to the very large number of Kashmiri Muslims who died. And most of them were killed by the terrorists.
Okay.
So obviously, it's not that the entire population was with them.
Okay.
So you see, there were big factors, like people who are in the administration. They were not with terrorism. People who were in the administration and the police whose families were not with terrorism. There were political parties. There was the Congress, there was National Conference. Later on, of course, you had the PDP, but when this was happening, PDP didn't exist. But these parties had large followings. It's not that the elections didn't have people voting in it. So there was a general acceptance of the Indian state also. It's not that it is only that there was separatism. That's why I said the vast majority was there, but it was silent. So like when we went into the valley, the major political leaders had all moved out.
Yep. Okay. What sparked off the need for ethnic cleansing?
I think ethnic cleansing had its roots in a lot of historical angst.
Okay.
So prior to the rule of the current rule, in the sense when they joined India and became democratic, it was ruled by the Dogras, where the Kashmiri Pandit and the Dogras, which included Muslims and large number of Hindus also, were the main stakeholders in Kashmir. So you would have people like the Wazirs of Kishtwar over there. They would have very many Dogra people holding big estates over there. The people, Kashmiri Muslims who had large holdings of land or any other business were very small. I mean, come to think of it, the actual movement started off by Sheikh Abdullah, who was Kashmir's first MSc, and he was refused a government job.
Okay.
So that it's a very similar thing. I mean, like if Gandhi hadn't been thrown off the train at Pete Maritzburg, then this wouldn't have happened. You see, this, and every individual has it in him. There's something that happens that sparks it off. So in this case, it was that. So I'm sure Sheikh Abdullah represented a general sentiment of the Kashmiri Muslims, and it got sparked off.
Okay. So maybe for years, the average Kashmiri Muslim, or at least that one minority community, had felt some sort of suppression or subjugation.
Oh, they did, and it was not misplaced.
Okay.
You see, if you go back into history of Kashmir, from the time that Yusuf Shah Chak, who was Kashmir's ruler, was actually betrayed by Akbar. Akbar invited him for an agreement and then arrested him and exiled him to Bihar. He's buried in Bhagalpur. Thereafter, you had the Mughal rule. The Mughal rule was followed by a Pathan rule. The Pathan rule was followed by the Sikh rule, and the Sikh rule was followed by the Dogra rule. So from that time onwards, till they joined India, Kashmiri never had an opportunity of ruling himself.
Okay.
So they always had this little thing about being suppressed. We also talk in the similar terms, colonial rule, Muslim rule, etc. So they also had their own narrative around this.
Okay. Have to bring you back to the Kashmir Files conversation, sir. When you saw the movie last year, whenever it released, what was your first thought?
First, I didn't want to see it.
Why?
Because I knew it would be all unrealistic portrayal of whatever, because I was seeing the conversations around it. Then I actually met some Kashmiri Pandits who didn't like the film at all. And they said this is a disservice to our community.
Really?
He said it has been done by Kashmiri Pandits and encouraged by that element, which is never going to go back to Kashmir. But those of us who are going to go back to Kashmir will never find acceptance in Kashmir after this has happened.
Because it has painted...
It has vilified the entire Muslim community. So, I mean, when you are talking about entire generations, there is an entire generation of Kashmiri Pandits who also do not connect with the valley anymore. So, somebody who was born in the 80s who had to flee the valley and is now settled in other parts of the country is getting into his 40s now. So, that child is not really interested in going back, or that young man is not interested in going back because he's built a life around it. And they have done very well. Because the Kashmiri Pandit community is a very evolved community. They study hard, they work hard, and more or less, it's a civilizational issue. They have capacities of thinking. Their women are also very well educated. So the family has a very good culture. So therefore, I mean, why would they want to go back to the valley? But there are many of them who are nostalgic and want to go back to the valley. And it is impossible to settle people if the vast majority do not accept you. Even if they don't come and kill you and they just don't accept you, you will find it difficult.
Because you're saying that the movie showed a tiny portion of Kashmiri Muslims doing...
No. The tiny portion of the Muslims were doing what they did.
Yeah.
But in the movie, they portrayed that everybody has done it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's the idea that I was trying to encapsulate. Yeah, because
for example, like buying the house and then betraying the Pandit child when he comes back, and all that story. And then, it was I mean, rather poorly. I think what happened to them was terrible.
Yeah.
And I've been witness to some of the incidents myself.
Before we get to it, do you want to draw out some of the positives of the movie so people understand that we're just trying to break it down? As a podcaster, I'm always supposed to just extract information.
No, but I mean, we can give a balanced view to that.
What is... You give me the balance.
See, in the fact is that the story of the Kashmiri Pandit needed to be brought out. Somebody had to speak about what happened to them, how they were treated. And I think the biggest problem that the Pandit faced was that he was given no empathy. They were not a poor community. They were a fairly prosperous community. They were suddenly overnight you are uprooted and dumped into this, I would not even call it a tent. And I would say it was like a juggi. So you have been dumped into that in a sweltering heat when you come from an extremely nice area where the weather has always been good. The place was beautiful. Here you come into a dusty, warm place you're not accustomed to at all. And you're completely uprooted. Your life is like completely at sea. So that was a terrible story.
Okay.
The fact that it got recognition so late is also a big misfortune. But I think it could have been done in a much nicer way, where the tragedy of it could have been brought out, because every Kashmiri Muslim did not want this to happen. In fact, I would say most of them did not want this to happen. When I went there, most of them would regret what happened. They were very sorrowful. Large number of them wanted to blame Jagmohan for allowing it to happen. And at a personal level, I do feel that the state failed. The primary duty of the state is to protect the lives and properties of their citizens. So at that time, the state should have stood up for the Pandit. There were plenty of forces. After all, you pumped in a huge number of forces. You could have created a situation where you could have protected some of them. There would have been attrition. It's not that you could have ensured that everybody lived. But at least you could have contained the sense of fear.
How?
One was that the Pandits largely lived in localities. So you could actually, protect those localities. You could like you have gated colonies today. You could have created a gated colony and protected them there.
Okay. And there's a bunch of more strategies like this, which as a cop, because you've practically done it in your own career. And you're saying at that time, they could have just green lighted these strategies, which definitely would have been pitched by someone.
See, the general belief is that, a lot of people blame Jagmohan for allowing this migration to take place. In fact, they say that he facilitated it by providing trucks and all from the army and from the paramilitary to move the Pandits out, which is also not untrue. That is the point.
You'll have to give full context here. There's people who don't know who Jagmohan is, the story.
See, Jagmohan was the governor of Jammu and Kashmir at that time. And Jagmohan had a fairly checkered past. Jagmohan was infamous for the Turkman Gate firings during the emergency period in Old Delhi. Then he went on to become governor of J&K around the early 80s, when he was actually responsible for dismissing Farooq's government, which is actually the trigger to what is currently happening. And he was again sent back. He came back and then he was again sent back in 90. So in 1990, Farooq Abdullah resigned as chief minister and the government suddenly disappeared. The movement was already on. You had lakhs of people hitting the roads. Jagmohan came in and to a very desperate situation. And he then gave a free run. There were a lot of mass killings in the processions that took place. But alongside this also happened. So it was not that the use of force was anyway limited, or that there weren't sufficient forces to deal with the situation. But you should have prioritized this instead of just allowing them to run. And I think that made a very sad commentary on us. So, whereas when you're willing to vilify the Kashmiri Muslims, you should also accept that this also happened.
That vilify the administration as well.
Well, I think that the people who took decisions at that time need to be held responsible for allowing this to happen.
How did they feel about it in the years that followed, according to you?
See, then the Kashmiri Pandit card became a card. So, but it was a terrible story, and I think the international community needed to know that what had happened to them.
Okay. You know that lots of people are going to get to know it through this podcast. Like, they're not going to watch the Kashmir Files. There's going to be a segment that will just listen to this podcast, which is why I'm asking you such, for a lack of a better word, intense or edgy questions. I want the full truth.
No, I think, the thing is that a subject has to be given its right treatment.
Okay.
It should not become a tool for a narrative.
Yeah.
So that the story be true. As I said, that the Pandits, had a terrible time, but the reasons were very, very different. So films like Kashmir Files and all will again try to vilify a Kashmiri Muslim administration for allowing this to happen. No doubt there was failure on the part of the popular government at that time, but the migration largely took place under the governor's rule.
Okay. Would you now like to talk about what you saw with your own eyes? Like the incidents shown in the movie?
See, the incidents shown in the movie, they've been dramatized, but in my opinion, I would say that there was some incidents that were even more horrible. I remember being woken up early morning and having to rush to Kral Khud, where there was a Kashmiri Pandit lady and her daughter living in a small house over there. And both had been raped. And they had been shot through the vagina. The daughter had died on the spot. The mother was still alive and had gone there.
Oh.
And I took her to the hospital. She died on the way. Now, is there anything more terrible than that? And that's a reality which I've seen. So when you do this thing about crying and lamenting, of course it will all follow this kind of crying and lamentation. But sewing off a body and all that, it is not. If you told this story, that is probably more heart wrenching than what you tried to show in that film.
She was conscious?
Yes.
What did she tell you guys?
She said, "How is my daughter?"
Really? Was she like?
She's very much all there.
But afraid and like toned down?
No, I think she was way beyond that. She probably realized she was not going to survive. She was more concerned whether her daughter was going to survive or not.
She was sure she's passing away.
Yeah, with that kind of thing happening, you also have that sense of foreboding. No? But okay, that.
How do you as a cop keep your resolve in that situation?
Well, you have to do a duty. You have to get on with your life, and it is at times quite this thing.
But there must be that one moment of, oh my God, what am I seeing here? And then you have to control that in your own head.
So, the bigger sentiment that comes out is that you want to go and lash it out on somebody. But the thing is on whom? Because the person who's done it is nowhere near within your reach. And probably at the end of the day, you may not even know who it was.
Did they end up catching?
You see, at that time, attrition rates were so high. Lots of militants were also getting killed. Encounters would take place. 4 or 5 militants would get killed in an encounter. You didn't know what act they had done. Identification was a big problem because getting information and evidence was a huge issue. People were scared. Nobody would utter a word against the terrorists, wouldn't tell you. The cops were scared. Like, that was one of the biggest challenges we had to face.
Okay. When you have a body like that in the ambulance with you on the way to the hospital, are you also sure as the cop that this person is not going to make it?
No, we are hoping that they make it, but we were also thinking 50-50, because if the bullet goes through from where it has gone, it's probably going to injure the major organs of the body. So the chances of survival are poor. There is where you begin to where you see, and actually, to be honest with you, it was acts like this that brought the militancy down. Militancy peaked in about 90, and by 93, 94, it had already begun to see its decline. So the popular movement, as what we would call the revolt or the insurgency, died out very fast. Because when this criminalization took place, people didn't support it. Now, you wouldn't have found a majority of Kashmiri Muslims coming out against this act. They wouldn't speak. But it's a closed community. The word travels fast. So they were all resentful of it. I mean, I could make out from the expression on the faces of the SHO and the constables of the police station who came over there.
Who were Muslims?
Who were Muslims. And I could see from their faces what is going through them. They were, mortified, ashamed.
I do believe, and I say this on the basis of all my Muslim friends that I've spoken to about this, worldwide, like even say you meet an Arab in Arabia somewhere, you meet an Arab in Europe, and you get into a deep conversation, you'll always find this with the Muslim community, that a few bad influences have actually brought shame to like the entire community. This is a worldwide guilt thing. It's this whole thing about so their so-called enemies, which are other religions, will say things like all Muslims are not terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. Like there is this narrative in the world as well, which is why the Muslim community is bearing the brunt right now. Even if there are good people within the Muslim community, and as you said, the majority is good. Because of that one sliver of bad, the entire community worldwide is getting a bad name.
See, I'll tell you one thing, Ranveer, is that when you get into that discussion, you will actually land up in the Garden of Eden.
In the what?
Garden of Eden. With Adam and Eve, the beginning of civilization. So these are human affairs. One translates into another, and things happen, people behave. See, human behavior is the most erratic thing. You and I have having this conversation for some time. Where it started, where it is right now, and where it's going to end, you and I don't know. What you were feeling at the beginning of the conversation and what you're feeling now is two very different things. What I was feeling at the beginning of this conversation is very different. So human nature transits very quickly. So therefore, what happens in human affairs, you can all be wise by hindsight, but future is very difficult.
Okay. So you're saying it's important to just focus on the present,
No.
highlight what's gone wrong.
You have to understand how the present is. The good leaders are the ones who can actually anticipate the future.
Okay. Good leaders in any position.
See, leaders are at all levels. You will have your community leaders, you have got your national leaders, you've got international leaders, you've got religious leaders, you've got leaders who in the social field. You are a leader also in your own way. You lead you have a very big following in the podcast. So you will also determine by the way you bring out your podcast as to what the society is going to think.
Okay. Was this the most intense thing you saw in those 3 years?
I mean, these two incidents have had a telling impact on me from what I mean. I think there were lots of things that happened.
Did you ever get to have a long, detailed conversation with an insurgent?
Oh, I used to spend lots of time with them.
Let's talk about this. First, let's begin with what's the difference between terrorist and insurgent.
So, okay, let me define for you the stages in which it happens.
Sure.
So, you have a situation where there is an open revolt. That is, the majority of the population is against the state. Something that we saw during our freedom struggle. When we say majority of the population, it doesn't mean that everybody is going to come out to the streets and start fighting. But the general sentiment is against it, and the people who fight against the state get support. This was a similar situation that you did have in the valley. The vast majority of them may not have liked the violence, but they were not unsympathetic. They all felt that even if these people are taking the wrong path, they are for the right cause. Then, the public support begins to fade. So then what you have is identifiable groups of people armed who roam around in military form, in large bodies, and they fight against the state. So that's when you come into a state which you call insurgencies. So I've had an occasion where very close to the Deputy Commissioner's office in Srinagar, I've actually been walking up and come to a point where on the 14th of August, there was a flag hoisting for Pakistan, and there were terrorists over there giving a salute to that flag.
When was this?
90.
Okay.
So that is a very insurgency kind of situation.
Let's get into the shoes of that boy who goes from being a boy born into India, having a normal life, and then suddenly choosing insurgency. What is his circumstances that have led him to getting into insurgency? Is it the influence of friends, influence of people around, influence of a lack of education, all these factors, or am I missing something?
Well, let me ask you a counter question.
Sure.
Why do you think the way you think? What are the influences that brought?
Education that I've gone through. And education doesn't just mean the books you read, but the way your teachers interacted with you, the students studying with you, the sports you played. All my perspectives in childhood added up to a large degree. And they're still adding up.
Perspectives in childhood built by whom?
People around you.
Like?
Parents.
So parents are going to bring history with you then. So our mental makeup is to a very large extent made up by legacy, by history of societies and communities. So a Kashmiri child would have been naturally come up with this whole argument saying that, the history of Kashmir, the sovereignty of Kashmir is disputed. It's disputed whether we are to go with India or to Pakistan or to become independent. So his whole issue about loyalty to the state is very, very questioned in his mind. Right? Added to that, if he sees circumstances which he thinks are only not only perpetuating, but actually exacerbating or rather enforcing that little historical belief that's been put into his mind, he will then think of a sense of grievance. Because there's already a sense of residual grievance which comes from the parents. So suddenly you find an elected government is dismissed. People have come onto the streets and just shouting slogans. In fact, the man who threw his own brother-in-law, Farooq Abdullah's brother-in-law, Ghulam Muhammad Shah, who replaced him, his popular name was Curfew Shah. Or rather, it was Gul curfew. Gul from the word gulam and curfew things. It used to be popularly known as Gul curfew. Kashmiris have this great sense of humor also. They always give you a little title. So he was called Gul curfew because of the 500 odd days that he governed the state. Half of it was under curfew. So when you have that kind of environment, now nobody talks about that. The period of 84 to 87 till the elections are held, which is part governor's rule, part Gulshah's rule, the kind of upsurge that took place in the valley and the angst that was created, nobody talks about it. And you know from where it was triggered, the agitation. It was triggered by a film called Umar Mukhtar.
Okay, and what was within that film?
Umar Mukhtar was actually a Libyan rebel who fought against the Italian forces. This film in which the actor is a very famous actor, the man who's done Shoes of the Fisherman and all that. I'm forgetting his name. But one of the very, very well-known actors of the 60s.
Okay. So again, it's the same conversation about us being viewed as colonizers on Kashmir. That's what basically caused it.
See, the thing is that if you go back historically, I explained the Akbar phenomena, but if you bring it back into our context, there were two events post-independence that were of major political importance. One was the dismissal of an arrest of Sheikh Abdullah in 1953, because he was the popularly elected the prime minister at that time of the state and who had a very large following. And he was suddenly dismissed and arrested. And again replaced by his own lieutenant, Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad. At that time also there was a huge upsurge. Then in 1984, when Farooq Abdullah's very democratically elected government. In fact, they say in Kashmir, 78th election in which Sheikh Abdullah won after the Indira Sheikh Accord when he was released from jail, and then in 83 when his son won the election. Later on, they go on to say that 2002 elections were also a fair election because then Mufti came into power, and that's where a lot of dynamics in Kashmiri politics changed and actually opened up the way for now what you see as the current situation.
Okay. What were your conversations with the insurgents like?
So I got my opportunity to meeting the insurgents for the first time in Baramulla. One is when I went to meet some of them in jail because they would keep creating problems. In
like
jail.
What?
I mean, there were large numbers there. The jails were always overcrowded, so they would go on a rampage or go on a hunger strike. Or
rampage doesn't beat up people.
Yeah, start roughing up the security guards, etc. And or start shouting slogans or not eating their food, which is a very common thing. So then you would have to intervene and deal with them. So at that time I used to go and sit with them inside the barracks and ask them, so like, what is your problem? Why do you feel like that? So then they would come out with their feelings. And largely this was constantly reflected. And one thing I will tell you, in the 90s, you don't see it as a teenage movement.
Okay.
It was not like that every 17, 18, 20-year-old had picked up the gun and gone. It was led by very well-educated people. Even Yasin Malik is not an idiot. He's quite well-educated and quite well-read. Okay. So their thought process may be in the wrong place, but it came from a certain amount of rationing thing we did. You see, because when you are fighting with the terrorist, you must not demean him, because you will never win that battle. Because in the equation between the terrorist and you, whereas you think you are in the right, he also thinks he's in the right.
Both of y'all think you're ethical.
You're ethical.
Who's ethical, truly?
That is the tragedy. The tragedy is always when good fights good. Because in this case, both in their minds are good.
And he might think he's good despite going about extremely violent acts.
He justifies it in his mind.
What is the justification?
Sorry, that he's fighting for a cause.
Okay. Now how do you navigate that conversation?
So then you have to start reasoning with them. And asking them, why is it that you feel that way? And then they give their reasons and you counter it. And then you have to explain to them that, they also have got selective memories, right? They will only pick up that part of the conversation which suits their argument.
It's like talking to people who are trying to climb up in politics.
well, it's all about selective narrative any case. So, but in their context also, it's exactly like that.
I've only had biased conversations with people on this show when they have political ambition. Going forward, anyone has political ambition, they will not listen to your inputs, not try to come down to the truth and just push their...
My thing is that I'm, as a professional police officer, I think we cannot get involved with narratives. Our work is with the people. The police is meant only for one thing, and that is to police people. And we have to understand how they think.
Were these guys eventually going to get killed by...
No, they were in jail. Why would they get killed?
They would get released.
They would serve their term and go.
So during the time that they serve their term, your intention as a human was, let me see if I can soften this guy up and give him another version of the truth.
Precisely. But it's also how you deal with them. I'll give you an instance where I was SSP again in Baramulla, and we used to have what we call the joint interrogation centers. So people who were arrested were brought there, and they would be interrogated by the intelligence agencies, the forces, the police, everybody, and a report would be prepared for everybody's consumption as to what was happening. So I had come back from leave, and the in charge of the JSC came and told me that the people are not eating their food. So they've gone on what is a bhook hartal. Fine, what is the problem? He said they think they want to meet you. So I just come back from leave. So I was dressed like in a pair of jeans and a jean jacket or whatever. In those days, those baggy trousers were very in fashion. So I was wearing one of those with those high ankle shoes. And the terrorist also dressed exactly like that. So I just walked into the interrogation center. So first, nobody noticed me. They just thought I was one of the people there. So I went there and stood at the door of one of the cells and was observing their conversation. So they were happily chatting with each other, and then suddenly they observed that I was standing there, and they all fell silent. So they looked at me and they said, they got up, and one of them, who was like their spokesman type of person, so he said, okay, we've got some demands. So I looked at him and I said, who's come here to listen to your demands? So he's looked at me and he was like quite baffled. He thought, I had come to, So I said, look here, I've just come to ask you one question. Are you going to eat your evening meal or not? Because I am paid 27 rupees per head per day to give you food. So if you're going to waste it, then I would rather keep the money and give you a better meal next time. So it will be a saving for you. So then they looked even more confused as to what is this man up to. So then they said that, we have a few demands. I said, look here, what is our relationship? I said, you're a mujahid. That fellow who fights a jihad. By that definition, I am the zalim. I am the oppressor. I said, can we have a conversation? We can't. So what are you asking? What are you wanting to have a conversation with me for? So he was even more confused. So then I turned around and I said, look here, as a citizen of my country, if you ask me for anything, I am obligated to give it to you. So even if you consider yourself to be a mujahideen, you ask in any case. So then they went on the very petty demands. They immediately said, yeah, I will concede all of them.
What were the demands?
One was that they wanted to go to the hospital more often, which is actually basically nothing but an excuse to go and meet their family members. Second is that they wanted the barber to come more often. Third thing was some actually puerile thing like that. So I explained to them, I said, look here, there are limitations because the numbers are large, but I'll meet your demands. And then it quietened down. Then they said, no, you must have namkeen chai with us. So I sat with them and they had namkeen chai with them, got up and left.
What do you all talk about while having chai?
That time it was a very mundane thing. घर में कितने माँ बाप हैं, क्या करते हैं, भाई क्या करता है, तुम क्या कह रहे थे इससे पहले, जिंदगी में आगे करने का क्या सोचा है.
जिंदगी में आगे क्या करने का? As in like they had business ambition or something?
No, everybody has an ambition. They thought that आज़ादी मिलने के बाद जो नया कश्मीर बनेगा उसमें तो कुछ ना कुछ होना ही होना है.
So what did they want to do in life?
All sorts of things. People had all sorts of visions.
What's the energy?
At the end of the day, what the Kashmiri youth thinks is what the global youth thinks.
Okay.
There's no difference in the aspirations of that youth and this youth.
Okay. Did they look at you differently because you were Hindu?
To be honest with you, a certain segment did, but largely not.
Even within the insurgent groups, they just looked at you as enemy, not like...
See, one thing I had an advantage about is because I've actually ever looked at it in the Hindu-Muslim context. They saw me as an Indian versus Kashmiri.
Okay. And because they would see other Muslim cops also as just Indians. These are enemies.
Exactly.
No difference between a Hindu cop and a Muslim cop.
None.
Okay.
I'm not saying that some didn't see it as a Hindu, but largely is.
You know, this secular angle that you and me are taking on this conversation, I can totally sense, and I'm sure audiences also know that you're a secular dude. Sorry, I'm calling you a dude. Like, no disrespect
problem
meant.
at all.
वो निकल जाता है, sir.
It's okay.
But,
it makes me feel young. Okay.
all right, dude. So, but just taking a secular stand on things pisses people off on the internet. You do know that, right?
I do know that.
Why? Because of narratives? Because narratives are so inbuilt. It goes to your emotional body, I'm assuming.
See, I have been born in a town which had a 50% Muslim population. In fact, more than 50% Muslim population. So I have lived amongst them. I know what is the pitfalls of that community. I know where they can go wrong. But we have similar problems. It's not that we have not things that we need to be ashamed of. For example, our entire treatment of the untouchable class or the Dalit class is not something that a Hindu can be proud of. So, I mean, before I point fingers to another community, I have to see what's wrong with me. And I believe that there would not have been so many Muslims in India if we could have treated our Dalits properly. Or there wouldn't be so many Christians in India if we had treated our Dalits properly. Or our depressed communities properly. Or our fringe communities properly, like the tribal communities. So we have been very negligent also as a community, and especially the quote-unquote the Swan class of our underprivileged people. So we are no one to hold a mirror to anybody. Now, when you bring it down into this context, I know that a lot of people talk about and think, but who is this Hindu narrative for? I am a proud Hindu. I think this civilization has got very great things to offer. The biggest thing that it had to offer was the entire liberation of the mind. It allowed me to think in an unstructured way. I am not obligated to go to form any particular form of religion or cult or any particular leader, religious leader, or a particular sect or a particular thought process. I am at liberty to do that. And this, I think, was the greatest thing that was attractive about Hinduism. Now, if I restrict that, I have defeated the whole purpose of Hinduism.
Okay. Acceptance, fluidity, that's our nature.
I'll bring you to another very secular but this thing, and this is a quote from Sare Jahan Se Acha Hindustan Hamara. People have got it into different contexts, but I'll bring it. In that, there are two things Allama Iqbal says. He says ki Yunan, Misr, Roma. That means Greece, Egypt, and Rome. सब बिट गए जहां से. That means they all disappeared from this universe. तब भी है बाकी नामो निशा हमारा. Even then we exist. When he talks about that civilization, it is not a Muslim civilization. He is talking about the Indian Hindu civilization, which is that old. Right? And then he goes on to say कि that कुछ बात है कि हस्ती बिटती नहीं हमारी. There is something about us that we cannot be destroyed. सदियों रहा है दुश्मन दौरे जहां हमारा, despite the fact that for centuries enemies have remained at our doorstep. This is a tribute to the Indian civilization, the Hindu civilization, more than anybody else. And that was our capacity. Big civilizations came, the Greeks came, the Shaks came, everybody came in. I mean, whatever else, the Muslims ruled India for a very long time. India still remained a Hindu majority because that was the strength of the religion.
Yeah. Okay. Could you draw out, again, using the Kashmir Files as a timeline context, what happened in Kashmir after, say, 1993 or 1994, after that period? You were there throughout the 90s?
Yes.
Did you gradually see things calming down, settling down?
Yes, of course. I think the chaos that took place in the end of 89, 90, beginning of 90, they happened. Then the administration came in, the forces got organized. There was what they call the Unified Command was set up. Operation groups came into being. The special operation groups of the Jammu and Kashmir police came into being. Because you see, where intelligence is concerned, you can't match the local police.
Special operations groups are like what the special forces are for the military. Is it similar?
See, these are actually basically innovations that were created by various state police forces. Because when terrorism comes up, it's a kind of a desperate situation. And the police forces normally tend to create special units to fight a special crime. So you will know suddenly have a task force being created or an anti-dacoity squad being created or an anti-gunda squad being created. In our context, it was terrorism. So we created what was called the Special Operations Group. So selected people with commitment and with a certain amount of courage and understanding were brought in. And then it was... these forces were put into place, intelligence improved, and obviously the intelligence came from local people. So when they talk about the J&K police had got a lot of intelligence and good intelligence, where did it come from? It came from the people only. So it goes to show that not everybody was against it.
What's the truth about Kashmir in the modern day? Let's talk about that as like the final segment of this podcast. This was very educative, I feel, especially for urban audiences. I told you outside right now, off camera, that I have friends who know about multiple subjects in detail: psychology, geopolitics, economics. But when it comes to actually what's happened in the country in the last 30 years, their inputs are only from social media, which invariably drives them into a silo. So they have extremely sharp perspectives about everything from the government to what's happened in the last 30 years to these kind of topics like the Kashmir Files. And I hope that this podcast reaches the educated elite in urban India, especially in Mumbai and Bangalore, where people are much more concerned about money than what's happening in the country, honestly. Okay. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and then head into what's happening in Kashmir today?
Whichever you like.
Why do you think so much of urban India is not in sync with the truth?
I think that will be very judgmental of men to say they're not in sync with the truth, but it's about what truth they want to know. Now, when you talk about...
That's exactly what I mean.
No, you see, everybody has their own worldview. I mean, and I think there is a very big distinction between what happens in rural India and urban India. And as India gets more and more urbanized, then that way that entire thing will change. Because urban societies are less fractured. Rural societies in India have got too many issues. Recently, I was doing a demographic reading up of UP, for example, state to which I belong. I was actually horrified to know there are 250 castes in UP. Because everything is we consider a caste to be in the four broad groups. But the subcaste and the subcaste of all those groups is amazing. So when you have a society which is like, completely fractured on that way and yet organized in its own way, it's a very different narrative. But all that disappears when you come to the city. So that conversation obviously will change.
Okay, fair enough. Again, let's address the audience, tell them the truth about what's happening today. I don't even think there are people who know exactly what Article 370 is, so you'll have to talk the ABCs.
You see, there is a lot of chatter and talk about 370, and a lot of people will say that 370 hatne ke baad ye ho gaya, who don't have any understanding what 370 is actually about. When you understand the realities of partition and India's position at the time of partition, we must understand that India was at a tremendous disadvantage. Because India's partition was a geopolitical decision taken by the British, supported by the United States at that time, largely to create a strategic territory in the Indian subcontinent, which was sitting at the top of the Indian Ocean region, dominating the oil-producing countries. If you look at Pakistan, they're just next to the Arab world where the oil was being produced. They were in a dominant position of the Indian Ocean region. They were sitting on the underbelly of China and at that time the Soviet Union. So you couldn't have had a territory which was better poised. They would have liked if India as a whole could have been there in their camp. But the Congress party at that time had shown its very, very definite intent to be an independent country. Independent in its true sense. So that's why you see we went and joined the non-aligned movement and were trying to move away from the two major blocks. This was the situation which was actually at the background of the creation. So you imagine India, which is coming out of our colonial setup, pitted against the world's most powerful people. They had just won the Second World War. So you see, and then you had this territory which was being challenged by Pakistan as a neighbor. And Pakistan at that time was not a diminished state that you see today.
They were powerful.
They were more powerful than you in certain ways.
Like what ways?
See, you had split a country down the line, and that country, when you look at it, was what you see India today is also with a lot of addition of the princely states. So the dominions as such that was split were almost half and half.
Okay, as in money wise, basically.
Money, wealth. Of course, it was the division largely took place on a 2/3, 1/3 basis, not exactly half and half, but that's a comparable strength.
Okay.
And especially we have an international community supporting you on that. So Kashmir became a fairly contentious issue at that time. So it required a lot of legal and constitutional gymnastics on part of the government at that time to create a situation where it could remain part of India, yet give us the legal backdoor to still show that it was not a resolved issue.
Okay.
Right? So anybody who looks at it in that context must appreciate that point. But yes, one would say that many years down the line, 75 years down the line, when you talk about that context, the relevance of it may have gone.
Go back 70 years ago, talk about the rules that were set for Kashmir.
So the provisions of 370 largely were that you gave it protection for property, and the bigger protection you gave them was that Indian laws would not be applicable to the state of Jammu and Kashmir unless ratified by their own assembly. And a separate constitution was provided to the state of Jammu and Kashmir, though it was part of the Indian Union. And the first line of the constitution, no, I think the third line of the constitution says, this is I'm forgetting the name now, but it basically means this is a integral part of the Union of India.
Okay.
So there was no separatist clause there.
It was just that we'll have some different laws of our own. Let us run it in our own way.
In our own way. And those all, I mean, even like they would call the Indian Penal Code the Ranveer Penal Code.
Why?
But it was exactly the same code. The sections were exactly the same.
Okay.
They also had the CRPC, we had the same CRPC. So there was, I mean, it was like a copybook running of the government, but okay, they had their own thing. That was largely to keep the sentiment and all that under check, because we all know what the background was, and then also to keep the world powers at bay, and also to administer it in a way that it would not create too much of an upsurge. Following that, a lot of changes took place. First of all, is that the titles of the Prime Minister and Sadr Riyasat were changed to Governor and Chief Minister. A lot of the Indian laws were extended, and I think the biggest law that happened was the GST being extended to Jammu and Kashmir. Because when you economically and taxation-wise integrate a country, then half the work is done in any case.
Okay, yeah. Because that's the purpose of geography being a part of your geography.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
So therefore, that had already happened, and I think what the amendment of 370 and revocation of laws did was the confusion that was there in the Kashmiri mind about where their sovereignty lay, that was put to rest.
Okay.
So with finality, at least they got to know that whereas India is concerned, there's no dispute in the Indian mind as to where we have to go. Because when I was in the state, I would have a lot of Kashmiri youngsters come up to me and ask me this question. That those of us who want to be with India, what is our position? They used to ask us in a political context, that which party should we go with? Because, all the politics would be around this whole 370 thing. So some of them were very pragmatic. They would say, okay, we want to do business in India. We want to stay in India. We know what Pakistan is about. We find this is a perfectly decent country. So which direction should we go? So therefore, this thought process had already begun to come in. And therefore, this is a good time to actually do it. Though, of course, there is a lot of thing, and many of my Kashmiri friends are going to rib me about this.
What are the misconceptions that urban elite have about 370? Misconceptions or its revocation?
See, like I asked a journalist once a question. I said, who do you think gave the constitution of Jammu and Kashmir to Jammu and Kashmir? He said, the Maharaja. I said, no, it was an act of your own constitution. The committee, when they were framing the Indian constitution, a Kashmir committee was set up. That Kashmir committee is what provided the constitution. So it was an Indian construct. It has nothing to do with the Maharaja. So, these kind of false narrative that this is a hangover of the Maharaja and during that time, and the thing is completely wrong. We created that construct.
Okay. All right. Do you want to add any final layer to this Article 370 thing? Because I'm assuming you get asked about it a lot.
No, I also I think we need to put it into a context.
Okay.
Because it's like this confusion needs to be removed, that actually where it came from.
Okay. Why does that matter?
It matters because it is you who gave it. It is not a legacy issue.
So
When you've given it, it means that you've also taken it away.
Okay. All right.
So it's also important that the Kashmiris should understand that.
Okay. What's modern day Kashmir like? 2023. What's happening?
Modern day Kashmir, as I was telling you earlier, that the average Kashmiri youth and youngster does think like a global youth. His aspirations are
absolutely normal.
Are absolutely normal.
Okay.
So you pull him out of that context, he will behave like you and I do.
Okay. Are there
leave him in that context, then yes.
Are there embers of insurgency still?
There is a sullen resentment. There is still.
Towards India?
I would not say it's towards India particularly, but it's also about his own situation. Because one is that he feels, that entire thing about their ability to govern, or their being permitted to govern themselves, that still is a dispute in his mind.
Okay. Why?
Because there is no democracy right now. There is a lieutenant governor's rule. Okay.
Are you hopeful about where the life of the youth is going in Kashmir?
See, their economic progress will happen. As India progresses, so will Kashmir. They cannot deny that.
That's all you have to say?
Because that is what it's all about.
Money.
Not money, it's about progress.
Okay.
Progress doesn't take place just by making money. Progress takes place in a lot of different ways.
Okay. Because money will then lead to education. Education will lead to an improvement in your lifestyle, etc.
See, one of the other confusions that people had about Kashmir is that they are very impoverished people, and now that C70 is gone, they will be getting rich. This is completely incorrect. Okay. Kashmir was one of the richest states in India.
Even now?
Even now.
Richest because?
The per capita income is very high. Very prosperous people.
How?
Because they've got a lot of economic activity happening there, and that took place despite all the terrorism. Because when you talk about tourism is only one of the factors that actually contributes to Kashmir's economy.
Agriculture
used to be primary, followed by horticulture, but I think now horticulture has overtaken agriculture. But then forest produce, handicrafts. Handicrafts is a big business.
Okay.
And then, of course, tourism. Those six factors that are there. Tourism would probably, till a while ago, was probably at the bottom of the list.
Okay. Is it safe to travel in the interiors of Kashmir today?
It has been safe to travel in the interiors of Kashmir for a very long time.
Let's break that down, because that's not what urban audiences know. When someone says that they're going to Kashmir, the common joke is, okay, it was nice knowing you. That's the joke in urban environments.
Yeah, but from early 2000s, the tourist traffic to Kashmir has been quite
and
large.
It's safe to travel around in the interiors and all that. Anyone can go, just take a road trip. Okay. Have you been in encounters yourself?
Yes.
Would you like?
There was a Fedayeen attack on me when I was DIG Rajouri.
Really? Comfy talking about it?
Yeah, of course. No problem.
Take us through it.
This was in the December of 2003. And I was at my house, and in Rajouri, the colony had one set rows of houses, a park in the middle, and the rows of offices ahead of the park. So it was like in one little colony of houses and offices for the officers. So being a cold winter morning, the sun was out, and I was going to my office, and I had a visitor. So one of the SHOs, along with his brother-in-law, had come to see me for some work. So I was stepping out, and I told them, I said, I'm going to the office. Let's walk there. He said, no, I've come here, and let's finish the conversation here itself. So I told somebody, I said, please place chairs in the garden. We sat down, and I remember very clearly the guy said, it was a typical that chamchagiri style, ki janab jab se aap aaye hain, तब से यहाँ के हालात बहुत अच्छे हो गए. That ever since you've come, situation has improved. This is a very typical line that every administrator has given. So I said, keep quiet. And last time I said, you said this, there was a Fedayeen attack in Poonch, and so don't say that to me.
Wow.
So as I finished this sentence, tuck, 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 to the firing of AK-47 rifle came right near there only, and I immediately understood that the attack is on us. So,
as in, you were inside a room.
I was
at
inside
this point.
in my house, and sitting in the park, the lawn in front, and this firing took place on the gate. So,
Which was on the other side of the house.
No, it was right next to where we were sitting.
Okay, and they were targeting the guards at the gate.
That no,
Initially.
So when this happened and we kind of got into it, what had happened was that this Fedayeen fellow had come wearing a military uniform. And it was not uncommon for the military people to be walking over there because they used to come for various reasons. So you would have people in military, often people coming to deliver letters, people coming to check the telephone lines, people going to the exchange, people for all sorts of reasons. So this guy was hanging around there. And as soon as I sat down, my PSOs who had got ready for me to move also kind of relaxed. And two of them who were actually to escort me personally, was to sit in my car and escort me, then decided to walk out. When they walked out of the gate, they found this fellow standing there and they asked him, that what are you doing here? And at that point he realized he would be discovered, so he shot both of them.
Why would they go out and ask?
Because they found him standing there unnecessarily. Because if he was in an army uniform, he should have been moving up and down. Or if he had any business with me, he would come and address to the gate. But just loosely hanging around there didn't make sense. So they saw him, he got suspicious. So they said, what are you doing here? So he shot two of them. That is the firing that took place. So then, of course, I escorted those two boys. Had those boys evacuated to the hospital. Of course, they didn't survive because both were shot in the head. And then we then ran after him and we cleared building after building. So there were no mobile phones or whatever. So on wireless and through the telephone, we told all the officers that just shut the office, do not allow anyone to enter.
You went back inside the house?
No, I was there already at the gate.
So how you were taking cover?
You were behind a wall. So when that happened, I just looked through the gate and saw that he had shot two of the people. So I told my driver, I said, take the car out and take these two things. In fact, my driver only shouted, he said, sir, wo Raju or Grewal ko maar diya hai. Raju or Shaukat ko maar diya. Raju Grewal was one of them and Shaukat was the other.
Were you carrying a gun on you at this point?
I usually did carry a gun, but I used to always keep an AK with me as a precaution, so I picked it up. So then we ran out of the gate. Of course, by that time, my security was there, the SSP security was there. So we all went and then we cleared out building after building. Then when I was entering my own office as DIG, I didn't go into my office, I went to the roof. And because when the boy was about being vacated, my driver had very cleverly taken two of the PSOs and said that if he runs away from this complex, the only place he can run is through a gully from the back. So they said, go and position yourself there. So the two PSOs were positioned in a house just behind my office. So when I went to the rooftop, one of my PSOs, his name was Parveen, he was on the other side. And he was with a grenade in his hand and he was like tossing it and indicating to me that the guy is below. So he was like saying that, move back because in case it doesn't, land correctly, then we should not get injured. And then he threw the grenade in that between the two offices because the office of the superintending engineer was next to mine. So there was that little gap between the two buildings. Then the militant ran to the front of the gate and my other PSO, Preetam, then took his gun and emptied it into the guy.
AK-47 only? It was all AK versus AK. Terrorists also had AK and counter-terrorists also.
It was about a 20-minute operation. This all happened within a period of 20 minutes.
From your lawn till this moment. Okay. Did you know that this kind of stuff is going to happen to you during your initial stint?
See, initial stint, we've had occasions where, we had encounters, face-off firings, standoff firings. In Srinagar, when I was posted there were occasions where, they would target me while I was in the public places. I remember instances where, I would have some officers or some of the civilians come and pull you off the street saying, Janab, yahan se nikal liya jaye to acha hai. There was that polite way of saying, I think you stayed here too long, you must move. Means that they could see that somebody was trying to organize an attack or whatever. I remember there was an occasion when I was in Lal Chowk, I was standing in the middle of the streets trying to discuss with the shopkeepers who were protesting over something. And then, they fired on me at that time. Fortunately, nobody got injured and I was pulled back immediately. But instances like that just happened. But this was the first time there was like an organized attempt.
Sir, thank you. It was a good conversation. Don't feel like I've unpacked all the layers with you. I do feel like you need to return on the show for a Hindi conversation because it'll reach an even bigger audience.
I think another conversation that you and I should have is about the entire thing about social media, the impact of the smartphone and what it is doing to people's minds.
That's a perfect angle for the Hindi conversation. But
and I mean, like of late, I've been seeing it in when you brought it in context of UP, the kind of stuff that's happening there. I was explaining to you earlier.
Yeah.
And that when you take it into a terrorism context gives a very different dimension.
You said that you're hearing cases where kids 9 to 11 years old have been caught watching porn, have been caught having sex also in some cases.
No. The thing is that I was told about these 3 girls who disappeared from the town. And when they searched their email history, they found they were watching a lot of pornography. And the ages were between 9 and 11. And then when they were trying to track them down, they had gone to Haridwar to check out a hotel there where they were expecting to find this kind of sex. Fortunately for them and for their families, the police had tracked them down there, and in the morning when they switched on their mobile phone, they suddenly realized they were staying in a hotel right next to the one in which the police was staying. So they were immediately brought home. But the alarming part was the fact that between 9 and 11 girls were watching this. So, and what the other thing that he was bringing out was that a lot of the crime against children, what are called POSCO crimes, are also perpetrated by juveniles.
Teenagers. Okay.
So that is something that is a little disturbing. It's not that it didn't happen in the past. We had instances earlier of this happening earlier, but there is definitely a problem now happening, that you have this exposure and the what should I say, the hesitation that used to exist because of social mores, that perhaps is not there anymore.
Okay. So I think that's pretty much the end of this particular episode. I sincerely hope that I did justice to at least your Kashmir experiences. And as I said earlier, I think there's a lot more stories to unpack. What I do with military vets and civil service vets at the end of certain episodes, which have been extremely impactful for me on a personal level, but I'm dead sure for the audience as well. We all collectively salute you on behalf of Team TRS for everything you've done for the country. I hope that the youth feels gratitude towards people like yourself. And as they say, hard times build hard men. You're one of the hardest people I've had on the show.
Thank you.
I'm saying that as a compliment. So just hope to talk to you again the next time in Hindi.
Sure.
And I hope you had fun, sir. Okay.
Good fun.
Okay. That was the episode with SM Sahai. I hope to have him back on the show. Please let me know what you thought of today's episode. This one was not easy for me to record. It's been a while since we've been doing those military episodes. So I'd love for you guys to give us guest recommendations of IPS officers, of police officers, of military personnel. Lots more coming up on TRS. But for now, make sure you check out our armed forces and police forces playlist of TRS, because if you enjoyed this particular episode, trust me, we've been recording these kind of slightly intense episodes for a very long time now. And if you're a new listener of TRS, I highly recommend that you go check out those episodes. These are the real heroes of our nation and they deserve to be celebrated. So until next time, guys, from Ranveer and the entire TRS team, big salute to SM Sahai sir, and a big thank you to you guys for supporting the Ranveer show.